Hey, DML.
What's up? How you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. Bit early, but not too bad.
Y'all are debating Minneapolis South, right?
Yep.
Anything new, interesting happening?
We're about to read a very innovative new AF that we definitely came up with, and then Gabe flipped Neg into the new AF, which is a strong will to power. So
yeah, strong will to power indeed. Send me that one I see if you don't mind. Curious about this innovation.
I have the email chain set up, but my Word just crashed, so give me a second to send it out.
No problem.
Siri, did you send it?
Give me like 2 more seconds because I need to open up the document again and then put it in the email.
And the one you want me to read is the one in the round folder? I mean, not in the round, the half folder.
Yeah, the one I sent out is one you should read.
Okay.
Okay, it just sent on my end, so let me know if everybody gets it.
I got it.
All right. Is everyone good?
Give me a sec.
Or should you meet on disk?
Mohlo, are you good now? And look. All right.
Next is the government should criminal justice reforming the United States, policing intersecting marijuana through interstate agreement advantages, treaty sale legalization, samples, nurture, drug free marijuana law, breach of drug control treaty commitments, would fit 18 U.S. States, primary removal drug convention, cards passed the state dynamically, incorporating international obligation to domestic law, and commercial marijuana, grave controversial convention, legalization, continued constitutional states creating recreational marijuana, including California, the co-member effective commercial commercial marijuana use of available century national community cannabis development, not complex legislation, challenge international consensus, cooperation, principle, shared responsibility, but no law, rule of law, fronted, they extended treaty for law for regulated, and cannabis markets to invade understanding, and determine defense of national marijuana policy, because countries precarious legal position of the treaty is mean the global legitimacy of international law. Scenario one is international law. Current marijuana policy says unsustainable. The contributing treaty commitments of drug control signals hypocrisy and rebels foundations of treaty law globally. Bennett and Washington 14 policy to believe in firm legal basis. Treaties only go so far. The federal decision not to prosecute because like an non-enforcement legislation is aspirated to be obligation imposed by treaties and enforcement costs of race treaty elevated upward NCB can raise criticism. Other nations are putting other important treaties. ACU says flexibility to interpret drug treaties, special treaty covering an extremely important goal. Each other drug control use self-interpret objecting to it. The certificate without precedent treaty practice reciprocal performance of given reliably call it other nations dependent and strictly performing your own obligations. Marijuana is key. Continue on and compliance apps legitimacy undermines multilateralism and collapses the LIO and interstate agreement solves Blumenfield in 18 Russia and China to supports prohibition to say reputation by institutional consequences. The Cuban and Swiss with Russia transfers Russia to enter the regime is the currently stands nation please use all the security obligations commitment of admission. Negotiation confidence to rule blood the number of nations could hamstring emissions waiting for the drug policy we exchange to be sorry nation the foreign policy agreements prosecute registration under drug treaties and international prosecute registration way out of treaty violation you can force the treaty use as source of precedent towards deterioration global precedent opinion Japanese taxes and rich can undermine legitimacy of international law most like an option to contain interstate agreement not treaty obligations for marijuana. International law solves extinction Brooks in 14. The risk of catastrophe is greatly increased. Limits got better words could manage conflict is aligned. International debates the world would advance about prosperity alliances humanitarian movements interconnected disease and conflict spread. We need to worry about the threats and global cyber attacks destroying the human race and nuclear conflict. You have no compassion understanding the risk use remains extremely powerful. Remains extremely powerful in pressure but for rules and institutions maximize direct international government to become a high strategic priority. Treaty credibility that solves nuclear war. So we withdrawals already should use diplomacy use of plank retraction for size the most devastating war history is possible negotiation Washington Navy treaty Bretton Woods and the North Atlantic treaty connectivity peaceful international system each would have been possible that you support what other studies did invest the leader proponents of part of the use actions in your case unilateralism of Japan generally needs Soviet Union unilateral contributed even worse world order one the US has torn up the international order to conflict balance and categorical increase in insecurity for resources development over China and Russia agreements and issues to influence the plan is both necessary and sufficient to arrive at international rule of law independently safeguards against a host of converging existential threats Bennett and Washington 14 we have emphasized and confidence ability opportunities approve the adaptability international system international defense resilience and adaptability we refer to marijuana as stress to international law states modest incrementalism because you have constituency fairs responsible issues as partisan you can test the market again really within each ruling treaty change now setting a precedent creative consensual graduate adaptation to international treaty system matter for the campaign against ISIS Ukraine environmental social economic security for global warming and terrorism and warming intervention the use of rely on international agreements have played toward action and marijuana is highly visible incremental change for American commitment building consensus conversation patient treaty accessibility with international order scenario 2 is modeling on the plan and catalyzes marijuana legalization globally Wenger in 1900 and the single unit condition to use cannabis is simply prohibited treaty spread no zero wiggle room revision with difficult amendment to require majority votes more likely alternatives interstate modification based on the markets and non-partisan modification for the balance between stability treaty regime tests types of consensus interstate long-term regulations because it's regulated the cannabis covers the consensus and conventions obligation should not be awarded to interstate agreement this circle with legalization Europe and also Germany Switzerland Spain Portugal Czech other EU nations Colombia Italy Israel could be wanted EU market to be enormous in Europe the progress of Archbishop Atlantic legalization of HS Europe and global cannabis market will be present for opportunities that's critical to rein in international drug enforcement solves Latin American instability rules and 16 attempts to reduce drug menace and great security threat to Latin American drug enforcement prohibition and consequences undermining drug and fragile democratic institutions cartels of general threat to states as imperative direct more drug eradication of production has not yielded results in areas this is legally regulated markets for so how the national system with corporate nations nuclear relationship with breakthroughs and U.S. system movement as U.S. has been enormously significant field reforms on cannabis decriminalize marijuana possession and use of government has been first engaged in debate about legalization international impact and not be underestimated state legalization about measures authority to attain punitive enforcement of legalization removing political diplomatic obstacles of drug law and for reform the partial Washington movement to use international control for regulation use in Latin America U.S. after legal function legalization is allowed within treaties U.S. and breach of international access catalyst reform purposes modernization of the U.S. embrace and not temple and treaty interpretation season and maintains integrity and systems function of redundant new opportunity prohibition spread temperature to international transfer level Latin American instability that caused extinction Ellison 16 there's no region U.S. more dependent security has rerun U.S. security initiatives to foreign engagement Latin American transnational organization strategic initiatives money corrupt institution and governments and ethnic networks is highly Russia China without use engages such a conflict that is just the region global assets capabilities more military operation human rights version of other theaters independently European legalization solves crime and security recovery oral and Geoffrey in 19 legalization cannabis financial windfall violence networks maintained by prohibition has never supported money funded to get rich hand open for the cancer networks and able to develop the markets and options for limited cocaine is very low prices through heroin only fund 1,000 users of hard to see how markets will replace the cannabis to positive economic impacts be subject to prohibition units and economic trade of the identity for consumption will likely increase if legalized estimates represent a lower amount of tax revenue represent 2.8 billion euros secure security 740 million and economic and 80,000 jobs organized crime caused extinction Robertson 13 hits with organization collaboration terms groups with substance circling network transportation WD for attacking our city stores with nuclear reactors for certain should be harbored by criminal decline escalates markedly in 16 when the crack will be about no one has control EU clubs next up in the crisis of cold substitute depression would be land making system breaking on its own economic crisis, so just better to Europe or major majority of the European economies, also better recession forces of national democracy, and good sense of peace, transnational climate change, and crisis, cyber fragmentation, neglectable political security, enacting CAs is critical to global 401, EU in 11, and congressional executive agreements are statutes, are passes within passes of the laws, the constitution, and acts of parts of enactment, Congress, and act laws, and law overriding through majority, enactment works against the commitment of differences, figures, very, and credibility, views, and less legal code, convincing congressional executive agreement must assemble majorities in House and Senate, advantage who is banking marijuana bakers are caught in a web of uncertainty, only Congress can solve Nichols and 19 federal level marijuana wages legal, putting makes distribution of Congress and banks, nobody serving cannabis businesses, because the third and first makes in taking the Congress, and reinforce the red institution and certainty not take like 90% of Congress members, group 19 national Congress, so that was Congress, and find themselves in financial web bank and wire turned on, no loan making Washington had to close an account breaks, risk violating federal law, the prosecution launch, and company like and craft its own certainty, Congress need independently lack of access skills, and traditional banking revives cryptocurrency, Lawrence and 19 at the rest of major industry excluded from traditional financial services, plus existential financial sector, substantially innovating marijuana making no exception financial have been able to develop an alternative including cryptocurrency attempts and not being made penetration, subsequent innovations, financial services, habits, services, marijuana attracted to ways of federal authority given making absolute situation untenable, and crypto fuels terrorism and instability angle and 16 cryptocurrencies anonymous currency back when it's to protect tracing decentralized security impossible to change criminality and use such as drug and craft trafficking terrorism costs and dangers that way and use attacks are likely and spur escalation argue and waste in 18 there's an illicit market plenty of weapons and obtaining crypto premium weaknesses in the judicial system the protection and nuclear attack efficient bomb and NECD unprecedented catastrophic scenario and the destruction propagate worldwide security governance of people in the safer trial global distress spark attentions among blocks that lead to nuclear weapons used by states and conflict increasing unilateralism current efforts fail but only the plan solves Lawrence and 20 legal cannabis businesses when excluded from making cash and to businesses difficult audit and transaction difficult against sales paying not only and compliance health system makes investigative institutions offer against marijuana businesses faced with throughout institutions refuse to write assistance based offer against marijuana businesses federal reserve uses account to institutions safe as little trust federal reserve objection are safe would affect the most significant obstacle to history reporting based on contact new requirements to more costly service marijuana related content issues institutions so not for those laws that began to do nothing about marijuana access and financial services of the basic accounts bakers are extremely risk averse and marijuana businesses are paying the price needed and hill and 20 if you need to be doing and pay to tax business inefficient marijuana means that you have federal law to make access to marijuana treated instantly use cannabis into your work to 12 billion materials to trouble reading 30 the majority interest units and make the prohibition of marijuana business in the country risk of the two ranking relations and sufficient activity reports are must be filed for any transaction source increase the burden institution ran very out of the 12,005 receiving services these charge increase fees institutions so concerned they're reluctant to work with the happy if they're found to legalize time independently cannabis wipes out super bug skills developing mutation sample in 28 cannabis wipes the drug resistant bacteria if we do want to fight against super bugs particularly component against killing and common super bugs microbes and processor cells extremely resistant to repeat infection compound and created by from CPG MSRA last line of it so much work to do antibiotic resistance becoming bed loss antibiotics lead to apocalyptic scenario rapid global mutation serves and drives an urgent need evolving superbug cells extinction Survata and 17 the human diseases locked in race to superbugs and we have inventing antibiotics daily bacteria cancel bad actors that should tell superbugs human defenses and existential threat the bacteria the master survival could be found anywhere invaders will quickly cause havoc antibiotics revolutionize medicine help create resistant to medicines antibiotics have superbugs we face microorganisms cannot be called pandemics or major risks become life-threatening infections become untreatable. I didn't read the card before Srivatsa 17 and or 20 and onwards.
We're gonna run some prep. Oh, okay. Let's see.
What'd you say?
Nothing. Sorry, I thought I was gonna take prep before cross-ex, but it's okay. First, the plan enacts a treaty. I'm confused who all is in this treaty agreement that the affirmative leads to.
Syria can answer any questions with that.
We would use a form of a congressional executive agreement. Our evidence on the first advantage, I think, from Blumenfeld talks about potential countries in North America, but also globally that could be party to a revised version of current drug conventions.
I'm confused. Do you change like some kind of international law? Is there like some kind of convention to make sure that this agreement happens?
There are drug conventions that the United States has currently contravened with states legalizing
Can you give me an
against the CSA.
What and like is this like, or is there a specific convention in specific that the AF works through or works with?
A specific convention? They're like some negotiated by the UN. If you're looking for specific names, I can pull them out for you.
Oh, okay, well that leads me to my next question because like your evidence is like all these countries join in and sign on. I'm confused about what evidence you have that talks about the cooperation of marijuana spilling over to other issues that are like.
Evidence is actually kind of phenomenal on that question. You should command F Blumenfeld, BLUM. It talks about how marijuana undermines a broader principle of shared responsibility. And it says that other countries are currently using it as a bargaining chip and saying that US prosecutorial discretion in marijuana justifies prosecutorial discretion in other areas and gives the example of Russia using US marijuana abrogation to justify not enforcing the Nuclear Forces Treaty.
Wait, this evidence also just says that Russia and Asia are like staunch supporters of prohibition. So I'm confused as to why they would sign on to the plan. Like wouldn't there be like conflicting narratives in the world of the AF where like Russia is super anti-marijuana in the AF and the US is like pro-marijuana?
Russia has another follow-on claim. The Suri evidence says that the most likely, sorry, not the Suri evidence, the Wenger evidence says the most likely countries would be Germany, Switzerland, Spain, Portugal, Israel, as well as a couple of countries in South America.
Okay, your ev about like the European econ decline is from 2014 and 2019. Do you have like new ev that's like declining now and reverse causal evidence about like, I just don't see a brink for this scenario.
European scenario is less about econ decline, more about just money that's being channeled towards organized crime groups.
Yeah, but like this is happening since like 2014, 2019. Like, do you have ev that's like the EU is going to collapse right now and like reverse causal evidence that says that this would be reversed? Like your U evidence is just like an FYI about CEAs and like does not say anything.
Yeah, I would disagree with the characterization of the EU evidence, but if you have a question, I can answer it.
Like, yeah, like the brink stuff about the EU scenario.
A brink for EU.
Like, does the app legalize
No,
marijuana?
like our evidence from 2 years ago says that legalization of cannabis would have a financial windfall. It's like a solvency claim.
Okay, does the AF legalize marijuana through this treaty agreement?
Do we legalize marijuana to the treaty agreement? Not no, that would not be the mandate of the plan.
I'm going to start prep. Just clarify what the AF does under that treaty. Like, what are the provisions of that treaty? I started prep, by the way.
The provisions of what?
So, like the interstate treaty agreement.
We would negotiate an interstate treaty that the most likely form of it would decriminalize marijuana in the US, but it would do so in
So it would decriminalize
negotiating
marijuana.
process with the country. I would disagree with the term legalization.
Okay, decriminalize marijuana in the United States.
No, not just in the United States, also.
Like at the least.
Anything about treaties.
Okay, that's fine. This is circular. We're still running prep. We used 135.
I'm sending it out. Oh, GML, should I reply to the one with Roche added? Probably.
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, it should be sent. Just give me a sec to get my other camera set up. If I counted right, it's 11 treaties banking. My video is glitchy, but is my audio okay?
Sounds fine to me.
I haven't gotten the doc yet. It looks give me a sec.
All right. We're still waiting on its screen.
Just got it.
So everyone else is good, right? Okay. First off, the new options the planning of ability issue. It is pre-round and pre-terminate premises. Impossible to be negative cause generic basic skills, fairness, and education disclosing. When parents come out, solve the unit, it's not about it means, but get all types of counterplans, amendments, infinite condo injunction case. The organs were found and everything else next topic criminal. Just refers to police courts and correctional institutions distinct from criminal law. Bernard and a criminal justice state police courts distinct from law which is and punishable under law. Police refers to the action law enforcement agencies to enforce the law, maintain order. LB enforcing policing is defined as enforce the law and keep the order by law enforcement agencies. This definition is necessary to prevent confusion. Also, in 7 policing is profession and detection of properly as the process of ensuring compliance, police may encompass more is there will define policing what police do to ensure compliance with the law. Tendency is the judgment after the criminal is found guilty. U.S. Court of Appeals in 15 of Canada. Otherwise, words interpreted as the order sentence is understood as the judgment pronounced after finding criminal defending guilty or the punishment imposed on a criminal is separate and is for the different as best the act is effective because also for anything that results in an increase in penalties actually probably to the changes to the penal code and prosecutorial discretion not policing or sentencing but negative preserve fashion competitive equity. The act opens up debate that was a tiny act in the process of enforcement or change actually related to criminal justice. That moves negative predictable and next office that this had the plan links future enforcement with explicit standards of congressional legislation to criminal law, which essentially expands Chevron deference. Laura and Tony. In Chevron, the Supreme Court established a principle to an agency rulemaking and granted monitoring administrative law as scripted and other courts give wide line to agency to find criminal defer to agency's interpretation of statute. The act triggers court challenges based on agency overreach and circumvention, but beyond means the deference must be slashed in court spark in 17. The department is the wrong entity put in charge. The department is charged prosecuting federal criminal laws and a bureaucratic preference for maintaining a status quo that will the department to second year's prior conflict of interest by human nature. Government incentives expect the department to perform that task. Lead the way to correct CDR. This director performance excel so we can rather than further CDR that was particularly wrote reform from there. Second looks at prior justice versus this criminal department. Please own ahead of the product for CDR criminal administrative regulation solve emerging threats. Woodson Bloom in 15 minutes as complex investigate and bad actors testify individual corporation that will increase security magnitude of threats to overwhelming door will be an reporting to face for it to require conduct of elections people non-compliance to cyber has long been subject to criminal law has engaged in rulemaking to regulate integration of UAS and parallel select agents of FBI security versus summit green legal establish strong behavioral direct with sufficient influence on law carries moral power of direct regulation as a frontline lever. Those are disease and engineering and AI lack regulations for existential threats and enforcing emerging technologies are unprecedented risk tech advances with significant unprecedented global risk create bad or give countries the ability to alter the global and could give a single country decided strategic advantage we need regulatory vocabulary to manage them can go working on national limits or entrance into allowing pandemics engine to pose an existential threat and mature and adapt to regulatory structure ensure civilian can be developed argument that catastrophic consequences and have left out the risks extremely bad outcomes we're far from negligible. Next topic is topicality. Criminal justice refers to criminal laws in Title 18 just here in 18 criminal was for us so government substantial criminal law finding violation they're not the same standards from above apply. The next stop is the executive counterplan. The United States executive branch to adopt an executive order establishing a binding policy regarding sentencing and policing marijuana through the interstate agreement, including that, but not limited to enforcing marijuana criminalization of regulatory policy of the DA, FDR, NIDA, the Federal Reserve Board, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation Office, the controller of the courts not to enforce any part of the controlled substance, regulating policy regarding emergency, and announces now the binding policy of the Federal Reserve MTSC and the OCC, if the United States federal judiciary should rule unconstitutional for the executive, the federal works, the FTC and OCC not enforcing above policy, the executive office of the president and chair of federal should publicly announce rulings drill and will be renewed by future administrations. The counterplans to president, congressional authority in favor of quick agency rulings enhances exact flag which all Christ escalation UN 17 foreign affairs are for the demands to decide that near have bread that's not so for the Congress is large wrong with this to decide the members of Congress interested in keeping the understand controversial issues are in favor of swear not of the national for first terror or terrorism organization and who is the time for interest introduce change next up is another counterplan in the United States. Federal government should enact substantial criminal justice reform in the United States in sentencing and policing of marijuana. Next up is a counterplan in the United States. The executive should not to adopt reform in sentencing and policing of the marijuana through an interstate agreement. The United States legislative branch by a single House measure of said action, thereby mandating that said action solve the advent of policy McMahon in 85 legislature and bills. Of course, strike down a regulation is not classroom, but the regulation book and affects rights of big legislative direct serious repressor at significant reforms, thereby providing also when agencies have to cope with a journal decision made by the South creates a legislative veto and overrides shadow precedent Moses and 84 while it's impossible, and the rule should take a necessary resolution. It cannot survive shadow, therefore required to pass and regulate the pillar one house figure operates to the effect of a one house speed size saves the administrative state board in 20 allowing tackle governments within really, Congress, a burden to from the bedrock of government, the courts can express willingness to visit the Dr. Roberts, expand on it would make it for conservators and reform that and come out tribute of their ability to act effective regulation, solve extinction, 10 and 15, all branches are going to nano reach the use of the must say the advancement of intelligence development, see our director as immersion feel active dynamic and keep tool, so how future weapons could create running collegiate arms race, self-relevant, and addressing this type of revolution. Next up is the topicality substantial criminal justice reform must include holding police officers accountable. David 610. The mutual between police and prosecutors threat justice police are really trying to criminal threat. So then must include only police officer accountable for the crimes that you should prioritize things that contextually use Divinity into your score and conclude that federal circuit and ensure the question not whether the word substantive has a victim how the phrase will be understood in this violation of the Act's policies not in direct relation to police accountably at worst their effects in the same standards remove apply. Next up is the Concord counterplay in the United States through a limited constitutional convention called for by at least 34 of the states to ratify, at least 38 adopt substantial criminal justice reform in the United States intending and policing of marijuana will plan to integrate marijuana reform with international law, including any recommendation necessary to effectively execute the mandate, including funding and infrastructure provision solves and avoids policies. Elving 18, Concord is one alternative for changing the LS work convention by passed on the would be called for by 2/3 of the state legislature. 34 states could start writing amendments. Limited specific changes would need to be ratified. Advantage no Latin America war, Sanchez 2-7. While there are ongoing border disputes and security threats to be insurance nature when it comes to heavier, they haven't quite sources. I mean, it's very unlikely to do with peaceful limited defense, but the regional governments have other priorities. Second, multi-lot I-law fails and prevents the shift to successful mini Latin Grant and Wilson. And 12, diversification of collected as a way for multi-Hispanic growing nations, many lateralism and is a response to growing recognition, whether trade goals reduction, deadlines to policy, and solve it leads to advocacy and practice a more targeted approach to problem solving, correct again, the smallest number of criteria to ensure largest possible impact. Mini-lat solves multiple scenarios for extinction. Multi-lat cannot. 9 and 13. And warming a global trend in no country can solve alone for spy commitments, capacity, coordinate responses to solving local, hard to devote research of politics, number of interests, stand at the tables of interest, for consistent concerted action, have strong emerging powers, new pollution, influential, analogous, disparity, complicity, interest, resulting solutions, false global multilateral agreements have become increasingly all of deal and measure results trade and curbing where inability nations have result instability, financial, spread international exploitation rate for as long as the problems that you mean gathering small number to make address an issue. EU recession won't cause war. Lao in 19 more can occur at any stage of expansion crisis. Their wars occur at any of the cycle of the problems. The recession breaker should exist all stages. We were defined other countries every day unless the world is going to downbreak in all the stages of the cycle. Negative way of war downward pressure. Market downward pressure. Advantage 2. 1. No internal link to Lawrence evidence about specific weed-based crypto like quote Podcoin, but the advantage the impact about Bitcoin. No reason why terrorists would use Podcoin. Second, their advantage about the creation of marijuana specific banks. But the first few cards are about broader fintech sector, which has no collection, no nuclear, no retail Macintosh and story. 18. Even a remote case where actors acquires a new crime over time. Unlike a nuclear attack, are more credible can persist follow up. A single attack might harden resolve the time, money, and effort to build rest of the areas unlikely to exchange. It's for to engage in risky effort without prospects that nuclear has effects on solid public support. The advantage also makes no sense. They have one card for the eternal link, which is that cannabis killed submerged, so that it's not an existential superbug. No impact, yes, pandemics infect us, but they do not kill us. The Black Death mentioned in orders of faulty period because the public system was non-existent in the 14th and 15th century. 7, no extinction from pandemics. Or in 20, this is their author, global plan. No, it's possible. Never fall short of being a threat to humanity. The voice possible. The 50% no down after but it's like making the events what's similar in the strongest states. With evidence of how long humanity we have and assigned public health body to for delivery and it is requires the declaration of and every side considered uncontacted tribes are Antarctic researchers and subgroups.
We'll take prep. 115 used. You good?
Oh, hold on.
Why does fiat mean that the AF would overturn Chevron?
Because existing standards about marijuana enforcement are largely delegated to executive agencies. For example, the Department of Justice is the #1 prosecutor at the federal level of that. The plan sets statutory language as per Congress. A bunch of 1AC cards indicate that would be the author, especially since you have a treaties advantage.
Wait,
So it's an
I'm a little
overreach
bit
into the executive
confused.
enforcement.
Okay, so okay, so first of all, that assumes that we pass a statute, changing what the exec does.
I mean,
we
you definitely
clarify
like-
what the executive is enforcing via the interstate agreement, and we still delegate that authority to the
Okay,
executive.
but like the
Why
plan
does that
text is
overturn
so
Chevron?
incredibly vague that
Okay,
would
so your
be
link argument
something
is the
handled
plain
by
text is
Chevron.
vague. Is
No,
that your link
obviously
argument?
not. It's that
Then
the
what's the link?
agency historically has had broad authority over marijuana,
Okay,
prosecution,
completely
etc.
agree.
If the
Agency
plan does
has
not
authority.
specify exactly what their responsibilities would be, I mean, look at your own plan text. Like, look,
Okay, so
it is
so your
so
link
messed
argument
up.
is the plan being vague.
There will be more, but like that is a major one.
Okay, so
This is not a trivial distinction when the whole point of
Okay,
Chevron
okay.
deference is
Darsh,
vague statutes mean that
The Chada
DOJ has
counterpart?
charge over.
Darsh, one sec. Can we just clarify what you read in the 1 and C? Like what offer not
I
read?
skipped
Other than black
I
holes.
skipped the Bellarmine consult counterplan and the rider.
You skipped the writer in the Bellarmine consult counterplan?
And black holes, right?
Yeah.
The Chada counterplan, where do you fiat that the legislative veto is upheld?
What do you mean? Like why?
Where
What do you
do you
mean? Why
fiat
would
that
it?
the court upholds the legislative veto?
It doesn't need to. I mean, we've read evidence that
Wait,
a single house veto would be
Chada
enough.
banned the legislative veto via court doctrine. You fiat that the Congress legislative vetoes, the Senate specifically legislative vetoes. Where do you uphold
No,
that?
it would be
legislative
a single. It would just probably be the house. Actually,
Yeah, I mean,
it
it
could be
doesn't
either.
matter.
It technically,
The
yeah,
principles
it
of
technically-
bicameralism mean any one of the houses can veto it, but where do you uphold the legislative veto, thus overturning Chada in the counterplan?
We think that the counterplan would fiat that the legislative veto is possible.
Where?
But
Where
like
do you uphold it?
historically, no, like Chada precedent says that thing cannot happen. The counterplan's
I
action would
precedent, but
therefore
where do you
establish that
rule? Where
precedent.
do you fiat that the court rules against Chada?
It's a violation of the precedent.
Okay,
that is
violates
that
it, gets
is
struck down by the
internal.
court. Do you have any mechanism to prevent court strike down?
I feel like you're missing the point, which is that the
I feel
sole
like you don't have
action
a
of the
point that
counterplan
solves
would
that.
violate the precedent.
Okay, court strikes it down. Does the counterplan have any mechanism to overcome that?
I don't think it would get struck down
Why?
because the point of the counterplan is to establish that authority.
Because okay, you specified the legislative veto point that the legislative branch does it, but you don't fiat that it's upheld. You don't fiat anything else.
Mole, like, do you have a more specific response?
No,
We'll continue running prep. How much did we have, Darsh?
8:45. 5:30 left.
Give me a second to send it out.
Also, can you mute on disk?
Okay, sent. Treaties, advantage 2, new apps.
Yeah, actually, sorry, before giving the order, I need to grab paper, so just give me a second to label the sheets. My bad, you're good now.
Okay. Advantage 1, advantage 2, new apps. The big T CGR, like policing sentencing violation. The Title 18 violation. T substantial, or like T subsets. The executive counterplan. The PIC, CONCON, CHADA, and then the DOJ/Chevron DA. Does anyone need that one more time?
Yeah. Can you starting with the executive counterplan? What was after that?
Sure. I'll just go from the top. Advantage 1, advantage 2, new apps. T CJR policing sentencing. T Title 18. T substantial. Executive counterplan. PIC. CONCON counterplan. CHADA counterplan. Chevron DA.
Cool. Let me just get the doc up and then I'm good to go. That's wrong.
Actually, Siri, can we take a second to prep?
Yeah, sure.
Ten seconds. You're muted. You're muted.
I'm going to start in about 10 seconds. If anybody's not ready, just give me a verbal interjection. Okay. Awesome. T, versus Trans Treaty abrogation shows up ILO causes a global wave of legalization that caps Latin American and European crime and instability. Yes, Latin American war, the emphasis on Russia and China, which it causes fear of influence, conflict. Mitty solves nothing. One, their evidence is about problems that states can solve locally, like climate change. Our evidence talks about transnational problems like terrorism, organized crime, which goes across multiple states, requires multiple states to cooperate and solve two cooperation. The national orders is necessary to restore peace and global prosperity. Healthy and safety. America has been countries work alongside challenges, institutions, and security lines, and watching institutions engage in isolation without work democracy. Africa, Europe, and the Middle East will elsewhere for authoritarianism and economic ideology. Three should be understood as a larger place to use and making sure we practice structure that Middle East like to do support it. Our union for governments, but use also support these evils and consequences of terror scripture. Redirect our guys to parties determine governments of and all our governments to understand the future depends on partnering and has work leadership needed to not train international research aggregate power competition and the disengagement of practical disengagement with all the problems of spent and deepen threats. Three are evidence cites empirical examples like Bretton Woods and the lead up to World War II, which all would have been solved by multilateral engagement across multiple states. For the European Union does not cause conflict. They run a card about recession, not our internal link, which is about broader cartels in the region. Advantage 2, federal criminalization hampers banking, and scripta, which causes terrorist financial organizing, independently solves disease through cannabinoids, which overcomes antibiotic resistance. Yes, internal link, it's about cryptocurrency. Broadly, our evidence as the new marijuana businesses determine the viability of cryptocurrency as an industry in the future. Yes, we do solve for broader fintech. This is full overclaim that explained above. Our evidence is hyperbolic on this question, but it is pretty good. Yes, nuclear terror. The only our blur evidence says that there are 21st sites where terrorists could potentially acquire nuclear weapons and then ready to use them. Not about retaliation. That's just the internal link. Is just a detonation and how many people will die from that. Yes, super bugs. We're not waiting for the pandemic stuff, which enters the last two cards below, but marijuana solves to CSA research Erickson and 20 research. You want to investigate the medical benefits or frustrated for the law purposes. Cannabis illegal. Frustrated license to take formulations of cannabinoids. The research distribution pregnancy the federal agency optical hinder research leave medical fighters in the darkest hard study effects such activities are illegal under the CFA. New apps good for creativity. Testimators not coaches. Or three interprets infinitely regressive and they'll answer the theory stuff on other flows doesn't justify negative terrorism. The TCGR policing sentencing one we meet Plantex says TGR and all the words. Two we meet at the right of other intern. The Plantex does not change criminal law, but the way that those laws are policed to counter criminal justice means controlling crime under criminal law use of criminal code no date. Use criminal justice means crime control or enforcement criminal law, including prosecutorial services sentencing of the punishment not subject to conviction. Use criminal date. Usually define sentencing as a punishment ordered by court for defendant order of a crime. Policing is the subject of law enforcement includes venture prosecution of crime. Concert 11. Policing refers steps to the law enforcement that applies directly to the general health safety, welfare, moral society, relation to criminal behavior. Policing is referred to venture detection, investigation, and prosecution of crime. We're also part of forensic science. SFT and 13 forensic drug chemistry applies to identification of legal substance, the criminal justice, illegal drugs, defined as substance. The SCA substances include marijuana. 3 Afghan, all due criminal degree statutes, financial crimes, 4 education, local CGR, those are public criminal law. 5 position, the evidence defines criminal justice, academic discipline, 9 area policy, defines policing, not policing. 6 to limits office teams, resort to new changes to police, 7 functional limits, ESR states, politics, reasonability, substance, always minor, unlimiting T, Title 18, 1, we are Title 18, 2, counter criminal justice was already above 3, the 3 cross-apply limits, precision, functional limits, and reasonability from the other, topicality flow. 4, the evidence does not have an intent to exclude affirmative, just says that some criminal law is contained in Title 18, not that all criminal law is contained in Title 18. T, substantial. 1, we meet platex in a vacuum. 2, we affect the entire category. 3, counter substantial. 4, in essential to define a meaning considerable and of telling effect. It means within not throughout column 52 the word in. We use the limits obviously the word in does not mean throughout. We don't have any authority prescribing any such meaning to the word in. Afghan, the arbitrary limit on after the effect group is total sure always get beaten the picks functional limits, ESR states, politics, usability. So this kind of always matter at eliminating the executive kind of plan. 1, multi-actor fiat at the voter eliminates all agent keywords because you can fiat the executive does something and the courts uphold it too. They cannot solve for all of executive flexibility. No reason why the executive doing the counter plan is a unique mechanism and the executive does expensive orders all the time. 3, executive flexibility is maintained by other structural factors like the AUMF. 4, permutation to vote. The plan of pieces Democrats is content with Biden's pro-criminalization stats. 5, permutations to counter plans. That's 16 active laws not with litigation include administrative rights and acting to pass a rule. Understand this proposal. 3, does not solve treaties. It supports international law. Congress is constitutionally required to negotiate treaties. Only is perceived by other nations as binding, limited, except to international law. B, the executive can unilaterally do it. Negotiate 20. The TC requires the AG to comply with drug control treaties, traditionally incorporates international law into domestic law. Section 81 requires the Attorney General from descheduling marijuana treaties, legislation, verification, lose the Attorney General, and President like to remove marijuana if the CFA executive order of just violate international law, does violate domestic law. Section 801 requires the Attorney General from moving marijuana below Schedule 2. 4, does not solve banking. 8 law on the books. Children and 14 CC prohibits laws from banking. Renewing the quantum transaction requires an act of requirements federal by CUC requires bank to fire. SAR for criminal penalties, risk of error results in consequences, create ramifications. The banks to be charged with the CFA, money laundering, hacking, says the banks would be prosecuted in the war. The release of bank regulators examined and have power federal of FTS here independently, reinforce the CFA banning bankers from their careers to life. 5, limits and a benefit of President 4, Congress will affect executive order by holding up bills on a public so can have immediate and lasting political consequences of pick. 1, does not solve any of the treaties advantage. 2, permutation do both. 3, permutation to the counterplan. 4, picks are bad because they move all affirmative offense. The compound counterplan. 1, permutation about shields because no one cares about marijuana when there's a compound, which also moves the links to the benefit. 2, permutation to the affirmative simultaneously of ratification, not intrinsic because counterplan artificially adds a downloaded delay. 4, delegates are federal actors. Super 18, I think we still state legislative ability to control delegates. Delegates in Article 5 become federal officials or held over the official right power from the Constitution, federal law, Constitution, official 5, permutation to counterplan bodies, and the function of state, in order to amendments, federal Constitution, federal function, direct from federal Constitution. 6, reject amendment fiat, multi-actor, multi-level fiat, bastards, literature, and eliminates any of the justice states. No, and approval takes forever. Court from ground conclusions are bad. There's no solvency because it possibly exists on the highest and most binding form of law. The FG can pass limit conventions are even worse. It'll be rolled back. Trust in one. You look to the courts even arguably confirm the foundational text of majority made it up from represent an effective by an interest group at a later time when there's lasting consistent amendments like you evaded or permitted the loan to effect you can change study without changing the constitution. That's already the Fifth Amendment 9 looks at a benefit safely and safely in H6 can be really plan a Congress also convention. Article should be a convention called by Congress. So that's what it would be. A Congress law makes a call of and does not solve the treaty's advantage because it cannot negotiate a new treaty if they're using a constitutional convention process or reinvigorate law 12 cannot solve the banking advantage because their evidence says that banks only trust Congress, which is critical to regulatory certainty. The Chada counterplan. 1. Permutation to both. 2. Permutation to the counterplan. 3. Permutation to the AF and the counterplan over marijuana policing. 4. Permutation to the affirmative and the United States legislative branch via a single house measure via veto policing of marijuana. 5. Permutation to the AF and the counterplan over reform broadly. 6. Permutation to the affirmative and the United States executive should announce its intent not to adopt reform. The United States legislative branch via a single house measure veto reform. Counterplans must be both functionally and textually competitive, which eliminates word picks and pending less. Doesn't solve the internal net benefit. 1. They do not feel that the legislative veto is upheld. This is cross-sex. 2. Legislative veto does not improve policy. It still creates interbranch showdowns and causes mass uncertainty. 3. Chada does not reg non-delegation. Congress still delegates authority to agencies all the time. 4. Unique institutions, the administrative state impact internal link evidence from the 80s and impact artists from 2021, which proves no escalation. Now, the deficits. 1. Causes massive uncertainty because it's a new unprecedented legal progress. The unprecedentedness of the internal net benefit cuts both ways for certainty for both advantages. 2. Cannot negotiate international treaties. Other signatories wouldn't find it discreditable. 3. Cannot solve stuff about banks because they wouldn't trust a new process and only want clear congressional action. The internal net benefit is also the status quo because their evidence as the administrative state has gotten too big, which is an impacting use for the evidence. Chevron.
One last thing, it can't solve CEAs because it involves the exec, so it can't be.
Oh, yeah, can't solve CEAs because it involves the exec, the Chevron TA. 1, this link is like really bad. Congress passes executive statutes. Congress passes criminal laws all the time, and the DOJ has to enforce it. Any new justification or explanation of the link in the blog justifies new explanations of the 1 A or 2 Chevron's getting eviscerated now. Mods 18 because we're just a field fire and diversion. Robinson Thomas Lee leading Gorsuch the doctrine of American the Carbon Fuels by Chevron Obamacare for housing accommodation faction rejection of Chevron about identifying interpretive fair sentence without any deference to MPD means that agencies still can make important decisions. Benning 18 Chevron's scope and narrows the major questions. Doctor Court not defer to agency interpretation because interpretation involved a question of economic political magnitude. Chevron was inapplicable to the IRS ACA 3 the I'm not gonna read that. 3 Smith and Berryhill, Tom Suffering, Evan Dedigill, 19 Supreme Court, limited Chevron, Smith, Berryhill, Held Chevron, and then applied judicial review, held Chevron as an influable harm, delegate, to Chevron the power of judicial review. 4 No consistency in Chevron knocking and indicating the pattern here scribes on the court does not refer to the AG or the BIA. It will be possible to cover Chevron non application to be a judge to call balls and strikes in general cases of short time to the right of Chevron. Strikes on yes, Chevron does not impact the ruling. It's not even mentioned. The court is consistent on not deferring to the agency. 5 Inevitable. Berman 20. The court has been taking steps to roll back administrative power. The court loses the liberal could also happen to Democrats. Ready to begin the presidency could rejoin the conservative wing of the court would reverse Chevron.
Prep. Okay, are you good to read?
Let me just switch my microphone.
Okay, yeah, I'm good now.
Okay, let's talk about the first advantage. Like for the second time, what specifically would the treaty do to revitalize international law?
It would negotiate with other parties to take away criminal penalties for marijuana and change the direction of global conventions.
Like, why does that have to be in a treaty? Like, you've made modeling claims. I'm confused why an action taken by any part of the federal government wouldn't get modeled in that scenario.
Why it wouldn't get modeled? I
Yeah,
mean, the
you
entire point,
read modeling cards.
the entire point is, for example, if we were just to strike down the CSA and be like, it no longer applies, you are equally in violation of international law because current drug conventions say that we have to abide by it. So the entire claim of the affirmative is that the way to reinvigorate it is by renegotiating those same treaties with other countries and saying, we care about ILAW, but let's have a conversation about how we're going to move towards a global framework for legalization.
Like, why is renegotiation of the treaty key? And do you have evidence about this?
I mean, yeah, the Lum field evidence as well as the U evidence that we read at the bottom of the first advantage.
Okay,
Probably
so
the-
you
the
negotiate new
evidence
treaties.
would be
What are
the
the
best one to look
stipulations
at.
of those treaties in other countries?
Sorry, say that again.
What are the stipulation of the treaty that gets negotiated? Do you fiat a specific treaty or you fiat the negotiation?
We fiat that Congress enters a CSA or a congressional executive agreement. That
About what?
the sentencing and or policing of marijuana.
Okay, so you made such broad claims about the need for other countries to sign on to this, and then you won't specify what exact reforms you do. You don't legalize.
I think
even though
we've made it very
legalization is
clear. We have the affirmative enter into new treaty negotiations with other countries
Alright.
over decriminalizing marijuana. We've said specific countries would be willing to sign on to those treaties, and then we've said that's good for both ILAW and an international system of legalization that prevents European collapse, Latin American instability, etc.
Okay. The certainty sort of warrants that you have applied to multiple counterplans. I'm confused if the plan does not fiat anything that happens in that treaty. Why would that treaty be certain?
What do you mean?
Why would anyone like trust what happens in the treaty if you don't even fiat out what that treaty is? Like, you don't have a treaty. How can that treaty be certain?
What do you mean we don't have a treaty?
You just said that you don't stipulate what is included in the treaty.
No, the treaty is to decriminalize marijuana. I just said that like earlier in the cross-sex.
Okay, and what card in the 1AC says that treaties are key to certainty?
Treaties
Like,
are key to certainty.
aside from the Congress key to certainty warrant, that seems to be about like just broad legislation and statute. What warrant is there for treaties key to
You
certainty?
can look at the Bennett and Walsh evidence. It says, quote, policy durability depends on a firm legal basis. It also talks about other countries needing to trust the United States later on in the card.
Okay. The Chevron dissent, I'm confused. Like, if the plan, like you made these arguments about thumpers, but I'm confused why they mean that, like, in the case of marijuana, Chevron deference is not. Actually, that's fine.
We're gonna run prep starting now. Okay, let me call Alok first, and I'll start.
I'm gonna BRB.
Stop prep. I'm setting the doc. Oh wait, I don't know how much we used. My stopwatch stopped randomly. Alok, did anyone else have the time?
Look at the call history and see how much time that was.
Oh yeah. 2:43.
One time I forgot to start my timer.
Sorry. Sending the doc. Okay, let me know when everyone's good for an order. Is everyone good for an order now? Okay, the order is T criminal
Sorry.
law.
Real
Oh.
quick, actually, how much prep did we decide was left?
Oh, 5.
Okay.
I'll put it in the chat.
Cool, thanks. All right, I'm good for order now.
Okay, the order is T criminal law, the executive counter plan, treaties advantage, and then the second advantage.
By T criminal law, you mean the
The really long one, not the Title 18.
Okay, here. Organized.
One which is like sentencing, policing, and everything.
Yeah, sure.
I'm good when you are.
Good. Darsh, good too. Okay. Sorry. Our interest is threefold. One, criminal justice is the institution that are tasked with enforcing criminal law that's distinct from content of the laws that the affirmative changes. Second, reform in policing requires mandating a change in how law enforcement enforces the law. The affirmative creates new laws but does not alter the enforcement of current law. Third, sentencing requires changing what punishment is imposed after the determination of guilt. The AF changes whether or not you're guilty, which is distinct. What we see one, the affirmative does not mean one. They modify and clarify criminal law through statutory change. Our interps prevent the AF from solely adding or subtracting policies. Instead, AFs must alter policing practices that are already unlawful and they don't make pre-existing statutes more severe. Second, any we meet proves our effects to the argument because the plan could result in procedural change because they can justify any app that changes criminal law to change conviction that magnifies limits explosion moots predictable app grounds stemming from words. Third, the app is just egregiously untopical and so irrelevant to criminal justice. It creates a treaty which we don't know with who probably mandates some kind of change in I law. It has a provision to decriminalize marijuana as per cross-examination. 2AC, 2 plaintiffs in a vacuum is bad. App teams should have out of court and ground through 2AC clarification makes burdens because winning team before substance is untenable. Plaintiffs is a good metric for counterplan competition, but it should not enable arbitrary and vague explanations that moot ground. Second, counter interp plaintext should be descriptive of the app mechanism with a dependent clause, and if not, then the app is forced to defend the action of the plan. The interp solves because T only goes beyond resolution wording in case of resolution or trickery, and apps defended beyond mandates and it's predictable since it's their fault because Surya was so vague in the plaintext. 2AC 3, the redefinition of criminal justice is wrong. 1, predictable limits, or F defines resolutional phrases with the intent which ensures common spaces. That's precondition to clash because their interp leads to infinite decrim apps where apps can criminalize shoe stores, cyber companies, and they can transfer agencies in and out of CGS with criminal penalties. Even if our interp seems to drive the TOC's proliferation of these apps proves the necessity of such a constraint. In fact, there could be more than 300,000 regulations and crimes that the app could decriminalize in two fields. In natural 11, 90 day review could the number of cars is much higher than 3,000 cars. Regulation range for 10,000, 30,000. Second is ground their interp as infinite statutes which moves research germane to carceral discussion. Teams start research about recidivism decides based on current police practice, but their interp magnifies the chance of bidirectionality. Engagement is the prereq because 2 ways push the top of the margin and negs are always reactionary. Third, their interp flows neg. It says you can change enforcement of criminal law, but not criminal law. This isn't a reason why the app does not change criminal law, but why criminal law is a prerequisite to their solvency and mandate with an effect on enforcement. The 2AC4, their definition sentencing agrees with us because it's purely the conviction and pronouncement of punishment, but not what crime constitutes. The second, conviction and sentencing are the same. Arena taking was of conviction sentence conviction person how the criminal accent active providing for your person guilty of sentence to other form of legal imposing conviction results of article judge. Third, the after changes the criminal code which is distinct from sentencing laws because of the legislation sentencing criminal constitution constitute crime they operate types and let them laws penalty recourse and the statutory sentences 2C5, the consular interim, they don't meet it. It says regulation of existing criminal behavior is topical, but they change what is considered criminal behavior. That's affects C because it first changes the statute, then changes policing. Second, it still links into our policing limits. Often see interim at 69 substance of AF for 69 different law enforcement agencies under C. Further 69 law enforcement agencies like 88. That's an officer arrested firearm at the small agency, for example, library cars, police, 147 law enforcement officers. Third, changing criminal enforcement does not limit policing. What's 15 states where legal emergency, eliminating criminal legislation. They have no reclassification of police has not scope of police of the particularly arresting brutalized policing. 2AC6, the forensic science inter. We don't have to beat it. We redefine criminal justice reform and actually prove why they don't change criminal law. Second, this inter does not justify why they get to have a treaty, which is what is in the plan 6. 2AC7, Afghan does not disprove our inter because they're intrinsic to statutory change to entire forensic area of the topic. And here's cases that serves as floor, not ceiling. Policing NAWC 25 policing policies practice accountability capacity building music color sentencing which area after day post control the situation determination. The second limits are good. Encourage targeted research, in-depth baseball imaging, neg engagement, massive topic combination of task octaves like surveillance and INA and reaction neg ground to AF, infinite prep and circular vision. Third, infinite research choice means teams have no incentive to promote discussion aside from tweaks in a massive structure, but single pair as a sole mechanism. College topic proves that innovation can still happen. 2AC8, fairness trumps education because engagement and predictable stasis is prerequisite to research and innovate new arguments. Time constraints shrink education to debatability is key to instill a role competitive incentives, push teams with margins to avoid clash. They say precision. There's no terminal impact in nitpicking off small difference in interest that dynamically affects research. Understanding the topic, the logical conclusion of saying the study of criminal justice excludes criminal law is that criminal justice itself excludes criminal law. Otherwise, it would be an inaccurate description. They say limits explosion. Double explosion is uniqueness. Limits are still good because they encourage mechanism, innovation, ability to apply generics. That was above. They say functional limits. No example of universal functional limits because no one counterplan a dis at anarchy means 2 ways to become experts on my new policies. 2 hands can't rely on perception-based links that require target research. State oneself can base ESR 1 the signal of doctrine and politics is not CJ or bad reasonable. They're not often explained above. Judge intervention, no threshold means endless deferral for what's reasonable. Competing interests, investigate topic, ensure equitable roles. The executive counterplan solves it, adopts weed banking reform through an executive order rather than an enactment which stems from Congress. It also, if yes, the FDIC and the Federal Reserve comply with side XO and not enforce the CSA. All solvency deficits can prove Congress is better, but what's required to prevent the full weight of AF impacts of value deficits through sufficiency. The risk of one must outweigh the disadvantage. Multi-actor fiat is a joke. There's no course CJ or bad dissenters. It's not utopian because we can fiat multiple agents because the only way to test the AF. Sometimes we just need to throw shit at the wall and see what sticks, especially on a topic that's so big, which was explained above. Perms, I don't strike just window. Fed Congress key deficit. We can solve all the counterplan is monumental. The AF is literally about executive stopping innovation, which more will be explained on the perm congressional guidelines inside a judicial review Goldsmith. Many six commission powers defensible. Country committee with Congress specific guidelines from the access to the person Congress found by review and not actions available to authorities getting consistent president default authority with a complete statutory scheme. There, they say there are other factors for executive flex, but it's monumental, which we explained above. Do both fails without a net benefit. First links a mini lot shit on case, which I'll get to later. Second, Rex war powers perm cause congressional delay from vetoes and a delayed disagreement. Only counterplan alone bypass Congress endorse CJR without a precedent that suppresses congressional authority under flexibility for a quick agency role. It's key to respond to war. That quickly prevents accidents, proliferation, and terrorism in points of crisis. No impact deportation. Do the counterplan severs versus NAC excludes the executive job at all. We enact local corruption only alleged to action safe administration energy sentiment not for inclusion not use of urban action same class of person law not regulation and law. Legislative and actions not included administrative effects. Seconds result allows Louisiana by House Representatives 5 the legislative a term result the next few deficits all about treaties which will impact turn on case the credibility stuff. The second blank solves review highlight the child years evidence which proves that they can see the rehighlighting that we did on case which proves that we solve all the certainty stuff. The case page there's no impact to any of the Latin America stuff. Can see the Sanchez evidence proves security threats are isolated, insurgent. There's no escalation. Interstate wars, unlikely regional peace continue for decades with support countries. Do not have modernized militaries to fight governments, prioritize internal security threats. All of these proves that the threat would only be insurgent. The trend can see unique claim that the status quo is not moving toward unilateralism or broad inclusive multilateralism is shifting to many targeted form of collective action among countries that facilitate the best cooperation of specific issues of coalition of the willing. The plans attempt at unilateral reverses and devastates unilateral engagement that always is magnitude unilateral solves a host of accidental impacts, global instability, economic class, environmental degradation, nuclear proliferation, require targeted collaboration to solve those independently escalating seconds probability, diverging interests, and emerging powers. New coalitions. The laundry list of empirics illustrate the complete failure of multilateral framing issue. If we win our links, it disproves the entire thesis of multilateral countries are no longer interested in multilateral. The app changes its dynamic, but not its efficacy. That's a grand indictment evidence turns because multilateral engulfs all other countries. Those less willing to cooperate will block and stall negotiation. Red cooperation only meaning bypass this step and solely engage with the countries that vested and similar interest in the problem. B is unique as countries are willing to transition to successful mini-lat right now. C several empirics prove nine less successful mini-lat dispatch 90 for the all the steps crash for the Kyoto particle they ran for senior structures pattern security multiple a lot of attacks way nobly felt to like also a lot of stage even left going should be the chief possible opposite for country yeah have a large possible impact regular left general real surgery defects appeal in cover state then multilateral It also turns global conflict. Ellinger says it skyrockets war, ethnic war, invasion makes all their scenarios inevitable. For the first analytic means nothing. There's transnational stuff. We solve our evidences comparison happens in 11 Germany, Latvia, cooperation for data, smaller group interactions has been as per reform, military, arrangement, big international institution work, exclusive, more effective, inclusive ones are highly evidence just as we need international cooperation. It's not responsive to our claim about unilateralism. The Cold War empirics are claims without warrants. There's no evidence to back this up. It doesn't justify multilateralism, just a proof of the need for U.S. leadership. But we came around anyways, which we said there's no impact to any of these analytics about Cold War. Only Minglat's also affected U.S. leadership. There's no simply no because problems all the major access to views at Washington versus the regional level of the willing to compromise Washington. We should focus time and effort on structures between like-minded states. Mark the card at like-minded states. I'm good for cross.
Okay. Question 1. What evidence says that mini-lat trades off with multi-lat?
1, you did not make that claim or like that no link claim in the last speech. 2nd, the entire thesis of the 1AC is collaboration through multilateral frame. One of your cards, I think, literally says, quote, like minilateralism. I forgot the exact quote, but it was like unilateralism and
Also, it's the 1AC granted
your
Wilson
evidence says, quote,
The 1AC
minilateral
granted
arrangements
Wilson
are
evidence.
necessary. One sec. Your evidence says minilateral arrangements are necessary to make international institutions work. It cites examples like G20, which I get. Why is that not in concert with broader international institutions like, for example, NATO, which are evidence defense?
Because the AF
Why are
is
those two
premised
things
off of
exclusive?
engagement with other countries. For example, like you made the argument that you create like multilateral treaties in which other countries in North America or whatever the 1AR pivots to sign on. Our argument is that US leadership up front is key because
why can't you have both multilateral and minilateral treaties?
well, 1, that argument was not made in the 2AC,
just
so I don't
answer
think
my
you get the
question.
shift in the 1AR, but we've made the argument that those are mutually exclusive because of US,
Why?
the necessity of US leadership.
Card.
We read evidence, a ton of
Which
evidence
one?
that says that US leadership can only exist in these
Which
minilateral
one?
stages.
I mean,
Like the
factually,
last
that's just
3 cards I
incorrect,
read in the
because
2MC literally
your evidence
substantiate
has cited minilateral institutions that the United States is engaged in. Our evidence cites multilateral institutions that the United States is currently engaged in. So why is there an effective trade-off if the United States is currently engaging in both?
the Grant and Wilson evidence in the 1NC also says that all of these like multilateral things lead to like missed deadlines, policy execution stalled, like failure of policy, like there's a lack of targeted approaches. All these prove that multilateral approaches stall the ability to effective U.S. leadership.
Let's talk about T, criminal justice. Your Bernard evidence says criminal justice is distinct from criminal law. Why does this mean that criminal law is not a subset of criminal justice?
It's distinct from criminal law.
For example, if I said Texas is not the United States, why does that mean
that interpretation of that card is just completely contrived? Like that is not what Bernard said. You have not had a re-highlighting. As of now, the way Bernard has said it is like criminal law is distinct from criminal justice. Like that sounds like
Bernard evidence says,
well and all, but like you have no evidence that says Bernard.
The Bernard evidence says, quote, criminal justice, the interdisciplinary academic study of police, criminal courts, and correctional institutions, which seems to include criminal law. Then he says criminal justice is distinct from criminal law. So why would that exclude criminal law then being a subset of criminal justice?
I understand what you're saying, but I don't think like your interpretation of the evidence is incorrect. He has separated criminal justice and criminal law. He has said that those are two separate terms.
Texas is not the United States, but Texas can be part of the United
that makes sense, but that's not the interpretation of the Bernard evidence. That's just like a completely contrived interpretation of the evidence.
Why? What's your interpretation of the evidence?
That those two things are separate.
Okay, I'm going to continue taking a little bit of prep. Let's talk about your definition of policing. The OC evidence says, quote, policing may indeed encompass more than agencies and entities than just the police, and it's sometimes even taken as a social process involving civil society at large, rather than a professional duty carried out by a state agency. How do we violate this?
Our evidence says that it's good to narrow the definition of policing into police.
I understand that your evidence says it may be good
to not change police practices of what is unlawful right now. You literally decriminalize marijuana, engage in an entire treaty process.
Where do you think your evidence makes an exclusive claim about what policing is?
It says that it should be narrowed to police. The evidence is literally talking about narrowing the context of policing. Wait, I'm going to take a couple seconds of prep. We use 22. Wait, I'm gonna go get my charger quickly.
Bellarmine, you only used 30 seconds is what I had, right? So
No, Mitty was using prep.
oh well, like the extra
during
cross-sec stuff.
Yeah, of course.
I'm sending it out.
Actually, before you send the doc, we need to take a second more. Yeah, 15 or 17 more seconds.
Okay, Mole, are you back? All right, I'm sending it out. Okay, the order will be the pick, the con counter plan, the chevron disad, the chata counter plan, the first advantage.
No, the second advantage and then the first advantage.
Okay, second advantage, first advantage. I'll repeat that: pick, con counter plan, chevron disad, chata counter plan, banking advantage, treaties advantage. Actually, I need to pull up the two.
Yeah, I need a second to organize.
Sorry, what?
I need a second to organize my papers and pull up.
Yeah, I need to switch around my Word docs too. Okay, Darf, you good?
I still need to pull up the doc.
Okay.
Olo, can you put advantage the case first and then?
Case first, then everything else. Okay, actually, let me just run like 5 seconds of problem. Can you highlight the cell that I should start at on the case page? Okay, so new order, banking advantage, treaties advantage, pick, con counter plan, chevron disad, chata counter plan. All right.
The cards for the banking advantage are so terrible. One, no internal link for the crypto scenario. They have one card about weed-based crypto like Potcoin that is not what terrorists use and no reason that they can switch over from Bitcoin, so they can't solve that. Second, no banking internal link. The advantage is about marijuana banking overtaking other banks, but the first two cards in the whole broader fintech sector is important. There's no connection between those things. There's no new terror. McIntosh evidence is that there are too many tech barriers, opportunity costs, required finances, organizational issues, and a deterrence means that nobody would ever launch. What's the choice response does not answer at all. Preferred because they're actual professors who cite tons of other studies. Fourth, no superbug scenario. They have one card max for the internal link, which is that cannabis cannabis killed some colonies of MRSA, which is definitely not an existential superbug. People contract them from sitting on an MRI machine at the hospital all the time. Fifth, no impact. Either the superbug is so strong that cannabis can't solve, or it wouldn't kill us. That was a double turn, a double bind that they straight conceded in the choice C, the treaty's advantage. The whole scenario is about funding. Leo answers their recessions do not cause war. War can occur at any stage from expansion to recovery, even if recessions are quick. But COVID proves that countries go to war based on military gains, and countries have unfounded worry for recession. So there's downward pressure. That's allow evidence. This does not take out the impact necessarily, because it's specifically answering the decline, the decline scenario for the EU stuff. The pick. The pick because the choice dropped the ball. It does the app, except it doesn't establish the regulations through a treaty. They say it doesn't solve. It's not designed to solve the first advantage, but it does solve the second one. All of their internal links are about decriminalizing marijuana broadly, which the pick does. Companies don't care about 8-foot treaty exists, but about congressional statute. They say perm to both. It links to the ILAW bad turn on the first advantage because it still establishes a treaty which revitalizes ILAW. Permutation due to the counterplan severs. The counterplan is textually competitive because it does not include the interstate agreement part of the plan text, and it is functionally competitive because it does not decriminalize marijuana through a treaty. It means the perm severs both text and function. Severance is bad because it makes the app conditional. Lets them spike out of on the ground like this. At least Pick's bad was a non-starter. The tweet literally 6 words long, and all they said was, quote, no app offense. That is not an argument. The one error does not get new answers. Picks are good. Our to bring is that we get to pick out of the plan text key to test the app, and they just need a treaty's key warrant to answer. It's predictable because they shows that the compound counterplan, not going for theory. You can see the permutation theories are reaching each other in the argument on the team because the punishment to the crime there. Chevron just said, I'll concede all of the uniqueness and no link, and the app does not actually pass. The app does not affect the necessary statutes. The Chada counterplan, it solves 100% of the case. It has the president has attention to maintain the SQO and has the House of Representatives veto, which functionally implements the after not doing an enactment that runs afoul of current Chada precedent, which bans single House vetoes. But fiat means that the counterplan is upheld because it is durable, overturning the Chada decision, undermining the non-delegation doctrine. That's flexible nanotech rights, which that way it's the only way to avoid a Grey Goose scenario and global arms trading in that state because it controls the internal link to all primacy, all conflict, etc. And this sort of innovation, which the Tate evidence says could solve disease and the super rings scenario. So you should think of the counterplan as sort of a better counterplan to solve the super bug scenario. Number one was permutation to both. It's nonsense. In order to require the overturning shot of the counterplan has to use unicameral action, otherwise it's just regular legislation, which does not conflict with current precedent, which means it doesn't solve. That's the most evidence. Even if it's not exclusive, it undermines standing, which wrecks the net benefits. Scalia in 92, the Constitution limits jurisdiction in case in controversy. The doctrine of standing, the area constitutional minimum standing contains 3 elements of the injury fact, evasion of legal protected interest, which is A, concrete particulars, B, actual, every non-conjectural or hypothetical. The next argument was permutation to the counterplan. It severs. That's bad because it makes neg links and counterplan competition impossible. A strongly negative TOC, and it's the largest topic and most biased topic in history. The counterplan is not legislation. It competes under their necessary definition person 81, and considering whether a legislative veto constitutes examine under effective analysis correspond a legislative veto does not constitute legislation. When not requirements controlling an act independently, an act requires both houses. Use PGO 91. The term means passion of a bill and identical form by both houses. USFG is both chambers. Cutting heavens. 97. Federal government means all branches of the national government, and D means all parts. Brain watchers and the use indicate the reference groups at whole. Group 3 and 4, which are both intrinsic terms. The counterplan only fails the legislative veto in the context of the plan. The first intrinsic term does the counterplan over overall policing of marijuana, which is different from the limited to decrim of the app. It also doesn't solve the net benefit because it does not establish the controversy within the executive by having them non-delegate, not in action first. The second perm does it over concerns other than the plan, which is intrinsic. If they try to explain it just to the app and changing the sentencing of the app, that is bad. A, perm texts are the only stable locus for block answers. Anything else causes sandbagging. B, qualifying the plan, and the 2AC actively screws the neg. They can't get policing nor sentencing links. They say functionally and textually competitive. 1, not true. Textual combination is terrible standard because it makes it impossible to include the specific mechanism of the plan. Second, functional combination is arbitrary. No definition for what counts. Even if the counterplan does compete functional because it uses a different mechanism, the plan is not a congressional veto of executive action, and it can be sexual because it uses different language in the plan. That regroup the next 3 arguments about the internal net benefit. The one is the evidence explains, but here's another card. Specifically, the counterplan Rex non-delegation. McMahon in 85, the legislative veto exacerbated delegate Congress to play interest to relieve Congress and determine underlying trial was strike the broad congressional and by invalidate legislative veto. The court direct Congress to control over administrative which make Congress less willing to designate. Our uniqueness claim is that Congress of course want to reserve non-delegation. Now Wilson 19 the majority not course likely to restore non-delegation to 5 will still consider it imperative. The deficit stuff first, it doesn't it says that it causes uncertainty. Why is this true? There wasn't a war. It doesn't cause uncertainty because single house measures and clearance and a specific single yes we can negotiate treaties. You didn't make fiat arguments for the counterplan, so you can see that the text of the counterplan enforces the mandate that the executive just said it cannot do. With that regard, the agent of the counterplan is Congress, which can make treaties.
Start. 205. Surya sending out 1 AR cards. The first mute on disc. The order is going to be the treaties advantage, the marijuana advantage, and I didn't know what flow the 1NR was on, so I'm just going to answer the 1NR on the treaties advantage, if that's okay. And then the T policing argument, the executive counterplan, the pick, and then the Chada counterplan.
I still need to.
Let me know when you have the 1 AR doc up.
Okay, I'm good.
Oh, look, did you? Okay. Cool. Actually need to pull up the 1 AR doc myself. Cool. The absolute treaty for reversing U.S. hypocrisy, allowing treaty commitments to impacts when international operations, international crisis, and wars that escalate. That's the first evidence to Latin America remains international drug enforcement as well as cartel flows. Yes, impact Latin America. One is cartels that's destabilizing. Our one is evidence says that we are interconnected to Latin America in multiple industries whose cash flows have conceded that warrant many lat turn. One, it is factually incorrect. Uniqueness is that countries never want to collaborate, but their uniqueness evidence is from 2012, and it's not about weed. It's not about modeling. Two is there do not turn conflict. There's no impact scenario that turns multi-lat because we talk about global stability. Three is that we turn mini-lat solving existential scenarios because of things in their impact evidence like warming rely on multiple states all cooperating force, and mini-lat does not trade off with multi-lat. G20 is not exclusive with bread and butter institutions like NATO, which was the cross-sex. We do get new answers because with UNC read multiple cards in this multi-lat reduces violence, conflict, mood, and 18 health, freedom, overall welfare, reinforce unity by planning policies that burn and stability relationship, lower health, conflict, and communication, increase political cooperation, internal cultural exchange, and capital independence, loss of contribution to peace alliances, and service institutions, public systems, regional cooperation, regional orders, establishing budget democracy, economic independence, and institutions. The other advantage, the banking advantage, we that solves marijuana banking by carving out a safe harbor for banks to impacts one crypto, rains and terrorist cash flows, prevents illicit transactions, stops here, two, and superbugs, taxation, cannabinoid self-research, yes, internal to crypto, one, it is untraceable and decentralized, two, yes, banking, that's our internal like evidence, cash flows are happening right now, but in other countries will move to crypto as an institution, yes, terrorist impact, our evidence says there are multiple avenues to get it, multiple international actors that are willing to get it, and an attack is imminent right now, which they have no game on, yes, superbugs are, one AC evidence is explicitly specific to antibiotic resistant bacteria that have multiple cell membranes that are literally impossible to stop unless we have cannabinoid research. A topicality, we meet our win condition is proving that we are criminal justice in one area of the topic, which means that their sentencing arguments do not apply to. We meet criminal justice as per the Bernard evidence. Their evidence describes an area of academic study and says that is distinct from a body of law, which is obviously true, but distinction does not imply exclusivity. For example, Texas and the US are technically distinct bodies, but Texas is a part of the US. And similarly, criminal justice and criminal law might be distinct, but criminal law is still a part of criminal justice. Three, we meet policing. The only interpreter defines it as enforcing criminal law. This is
is not exclusive. The only way to bring change enforcement of laws is through changing the laws. It proves that they're inextricably tied. Their NAACP evidence is about police practices, which we meet because we change what police can. The police post FIE, not marijuana, for TKO. They had no counter definition of forensic science, which means they must win the criminal law definition. The NSTC evidence is about forensic chemistry, substance 5. The burden is on them for topicality because they must generate a violation about a RAF. Extra T begs the question of effects versus mandate. We have won that their distinction is arbitrary and doesn't exist. There's no way for people to change policing directly. Counter criminal justice means criminal law. 2 pieces of offense. 1, aft predictability. They do not have a violation that is rooted in evidence. Aft predictability outweighs A, the prerequisite for debatability. The only way we know what we will be debating about before debating, which is key to debate itself. B's limits for the sake of limits are bad. Just as counter are only RF. And the 300,000 regulations card they don't solve because under their interp, they can stop the policing of those regulations, not the regulation themselves. And those counterplans to generics. 2 is ground. A, their interprets that Congress cannot modify criminal law. And if they do that, that is extra T. That means that there's no topical way Congress can be an AF on the resolution of branches that do policing directly, which is what their interp allows, is solely exec AF. That is bad for both the AF and the neg because it means the neg does not get Asian counterplans. B, turns their offense because the neg has the capability to innovate over the course of topic and process counterplans. The win rate at the TOC was 50.5% to 49.5. Now defense 1, functional limits. We do have examples of functional limits that universal courts use and our OP neg generics. Their interp is actually worse because it excludes those 2. Their interp is really large too. Effects versus mandates actually screws them because they allow the same things. It filter reasonability through the quality of evidence and the predictability to make the exact counterplan. Internal benefit. They read a new judicial review card. I get to answer it. The 1 is that there are more structural factors for flexibility. Sanger and 18 Pentagon compared to more aggressive increasing conflict. USA struggle without a foot intervention conflicts with a small represents 30 utilize use of weapons to station to strikes their principal troubleshooting aggressive separate to unread and potential 30 separate just falter and 2 that do not have an internal link to the things that their counterplan actually does. And overall executive flexibility for war powers the deficit. 1, counterplan is illegal, stands the plan. The executive lacks jurisdiction to deschedule marijuana. It stands to change international obligations. If it gets struck down, triggers backlash, trigger erode compliance to international law. 2, implementing legislation use obligations under drug conventions are domestically incorporated to statute via the Controlled Substance Act. That's a blooming for evidence. Overturning that requires Congress 3D and credibility. Even if the executive proposes treaty, that treaty is not binding, enforceable, and nor credible stands legislative backing. That's you links and John's evidence. Also link harder because I don't have to expand. I don't still have to do the same things to the Chevron counterplan. The Chevron counterplan, they dropped all the difference to Chevron. 1, they do not fiat. The legislative veto is upheld. They've spotted us the fact that the legislative veto is unconstitutional right now, yet they do not have a plank that says the court would uphold that as constitutional. And 2, cross-apply all the arguments from the Chevron DA. They apply to their impact about the administrative state. Chevron is uncertain, which means we've been living in ambiguity about executive power for years. And 3, no connection between Chevron and agencies and things like that. Our deficit was just not uncertainty. Our deficit was about treaty negotiation. They got there too late. It does not solve treaties because the counterplan rules executive must go into interstate agreement, which they factually cannot do given the conceded terms on the exec counterplan permutation to the F and the counterplan of reform broadly. It solves the net benefit. There's no evidence that says the plan is key and the perm does the charter process over reform, which is sufficient. That means any reform anyone ever does the legislative can veto. It is textually legitimate because it includes all the plans. In other words, the counterplan. The perm is functionally legitimate because it does not add any function to the counterplan. 1R is wrong. It has no reason that functional intrinsicness is even bad. An additional layer of specification should be treated as making the counterplan larger, not smaller.
I'm gonna call Alok and then start prep. Is everyone good for an order? Is Jeremy here? I think Jeremy isn't here. Okay, everyone's good for an order now. Okay, the order is going to be the pick, the executive counterplan, the Chada counterplan, the treaties advantage, and then the banking advantage.
One more time.
Yeah, the pick, executive counterplan, Chada, treaties, banking. Okay, everyone's good to go. Not getting to the pick in the 1 year is a death sentence for them because it means that they have zero external offense versus the multilateralism turn, which will be explained on case the pick solves the entirety of the second advantage about banking because it does the AF without actually entering the interstate treaty. I'm going to make this very clear. The only internal link they have for any of their impacts on the first advantage is about the treaty, which I'll get to the impact turn later, but it definitely solves the second advantage. They have no game on this. So it's terminal defense, the executive counterplan. I'm not going for it. They can't crossplay stuff. The other counterplan is done by Congress, except without the treaty, the Chada counterplan, it's conditional. I'm not going for it. They haven't crossplayed any deficit, so they don't get any new extrapolation. The next piece, the treaty's advantage, trying to cling to multilateralism causes extinction. They've conceded that it slows policy making, it slows the ability to respond to diversity of problems because it requires a large number of countries to require crisis. But the question to resolve this is, do we need a small number of countries to resolve crisis or a large number? That's a reason why unilateralism is a preferable strategy to multilateralism. There's no impact calculus done whatsoever in the 1 year, which will be the death knell for Bellarmine in this debate. They've considered that weighs the impact on the second advantage because it controls the larger scope of a diversity of issues. They've considered that it's a host of existential impacts from global instability, economic collapse, environmental degradation, and nuclear proliferation. Are you really worried about organized crime, which they don't even have an extinction impact card? Or are you worried about the litany of impacts that they've dropped, which all escalate to an existential crisis? Even if our card doesn't say extinction, just the internal links to access such a large existential catastrophe should be a reason why you should have a strong psychological preference for all of our impacts. They've also dropped that it matters more on probability because of diverging interests, emerging powers, new coalition, which is a uniqueness question as to why you should have a preference for our impact. You should give this impact 100% time frame because they have no defense whatsoever to any of these laundry lists of impact, which is the reason why our impact comes first. Time frame matters most because it determines whose impact turns who's first and determines who die because we can only all die once. Couple of turns case implications dropped is first is that other countries will be less willing to cooperate because they'll block and stall negotiations. You can think about this in the context of bypassing and solely engaging with countries that have vested in similar interests. For example, there are arguments about Russia and China and other countries. All their modeling stuff is we've internally turned that because we've proven that multilateralism is a strategy that leads to more negotiation because more countries seem like they can just upset everything because they think that they need which will lower the United States credibility, which will be explained below about the leadership stuff. They've also dropped that countries are willing to transition a successful mini-lat right now. They do not have a uniqueness claim as to how multi-lat is sustainable, which is another reason as to why our offense outweighs. They've independently dropped the NIME evidence, which is a comparison of mini-lat and multi-lat. It cites multiple empirics. It says the last time we had a successful multilateral trade agreement was in 1994 with the Kyoto Protocol, but none of these signatories actually made their targets, which is another warrant as to why, which is another empirical example of the failure of those treaties to actually work, which is a reason why countries, a smaller amount of countries is a better way to do it. They've also dropped the right evidence. It's usually the way you should frame the evidence. It says that the international order in trying to solve these large crises through things like the Cold War increases deadlock because it increases the chance of negotiation, which slows the ability to have rapid policy making, which is necessary in the context of rising emerging threats, which is their own uniqueness claim about all of their laundry list of existential crises that they've gone for the framing issues that multilateralism has failed in every single instance in the past. So it's triad to allow the shift to minilateralism. Right. And now this debate will come down to whose impact turns whose, but we're ahead on time frame, which will explain above. It takes so long to generate broader international law. They have to establish even more treaties, negotiate specific amounts of warming and conflict, but the changing of mini-lat is coming right now. They dropped the NIME evidence about the successful thing, which I said above. They just threw out the word that we don't have uniqueness, but they didn't respond to the 1NC Grant and Wilson evidence. I read a ton of evidence in the 2NC, which I explained above, which says that, quote, there is growing interest in minilateralism. Card 0 zero in the 1AR and the 2AC to respond to this uniqueness claim, and they've just conceded the link, so there's only risk of our often zero evidence. The evidence also enters there's mini-laterals warming claim because A, it says that historically multilateral agreements on warming have failed because attempts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions have missed their deadlines and stalled. It says that mini-lateralism can solve it because small countries are need to ensure success. The gods of evidence from the 1 and 2 was also conceded it's far better to achieve the United States goals if we partner with the countries aligned with interest, because any alternative means that the United States gets wrecked because of disagreements or new card. It's unjustified. They have not responded to uniqueness claim. We've wanted a larger uniqueness claim about the way it exists, but independently you can vote on this U.S. leadership argument. We've argued that we access all these international collaboration arguments because the United States has a larger credibility, has American leadership, which solves resolve on other things. It just does not mean that we need their negotiation and access every time we look to solve a larger existential impact. The Latin America scenario, it's terrible. Their cartels F is from 2014. There's no brink or reverse causal F, but there's limited defense budgets, which means that they need F that spills up from small insurgent threats to large international conflict. In the existential threat, the Latin America scenario has zero impact because the Sanchez evidence was dropped in the 2AC and 1AR. It strikes structural factors. That means that even if cartels and such exist, it doesn't matter because there's no brink. Their evidence is from 2014 and 2019. It does not answer larger claims. They say that countries don't want to cooperate. I did that above. They dropped 3 2NC cards at Hampson evidence. That's a Harvard PhD that has dedicated their career to researching this. It says that smaller reform is better for international institutions. Second, the gods of extension proves above. It proves the time frame distinction because negotiating treaties with larger number of countries take a longer amount of time, which is reason as why our impacts outweigh 30 is the Hamoud evidence. The 1AR read is not a multilateralism card. Read it. I promise you, you'll conclude negative. It's about democracy and economic independence, which is possible after. So we solve all their offense. Yeah, like no new 2AR extrapolation, protect the 2NR, all of that good stuff.
We have, how much do we have at Arch? Like 220?
Just 2.
Okay, 2. My bad.
I'll start making a card doc because I expect that'll be important.
Yes, please.
Okay. Is everybody good? The two are not coming to terms for why mini-lat trades off with multi-lat means that they have functionally lost this debate. We are winning a large insulated risk of Latin American conflict that is totally insulated from all the treaty stuff and outweighs their long-term improbable scenario about treaty collapse. You should remember that all of the two are posturing about time frame magnitude rests on the fact that they are reading cards from 2012, which proves the point this is not an immediate scenario, it's not happening now, but we do have a likely immediate risk about Latin America. We are reading evidence from 2019 on this question that says that cartels are fomenting unique amounts of instability and that drug prohibition is necessary to undercut their viability by cutting off cash streams from the United States. Two, we have evidence that this goes truly existential. As the twin are admitted, none of their evidence says that they solve for any specific existential threats, and they've not even defined one specific existential scenario that multilateralism can solve for. Regardless, we have specific scenarios of Russia and China going into Latin America, so you know that there's a probable scenario that you can speak to in the RFD, but you can't explain what specific existential series of events a multilateral scenario would be able to solve. Three, their scientist evidence is irrelevant. Other than saying he's a Harvard PhD, they have no explanation of what the warrants in the cards are. The Rola's evidence is far better. It is also from a PhD. It is from 2019, and it says the two main things that are undercutting Latin American instability are cartels and a lack of American diplomatic engagement. The plan solves both because one, restores U.S. credibility by reversing our hypocritical stance on international drug prohibitions, and two, cuts off cash streams for cartels by moving towards a global prohibition scheme, which means that we also solve and undercut the instability. You should view the Latin America thing as linear. If we can undercut some of the largest factors that are driving Latin American instability, then it makes it less likely that Russia and China intervene, which draws in the United States. Three, the treaty advantage does not interact with this scenario of the debate. The last speech has not explained how it does. They do not get to go over there. Now, the very beginning of the minilateralism and multilateralism debate. One, they are not mutually exclusive. I did not catch an answer in the 2R. We explicitly cross-examined them on this for like 3 minutes. The 1AR explained it, and the 2R still has not fundamentally grappled with it. They have a bunch of cards that people are interested in minilateralism, but newsflash, you can be party to more than one treaty at one time. People can be both. One, we want to do things like G20, which is an example of a mini-lateral treaty, which is something that their evidence describes, but also say that we want to be part of Bretton Woods, the post-World War II order, NATO, which are all larger economic systems and military systems that prove that you can be party to both at once, which allows for both rapid response and two, a series of multilateralism that solves every single emerging threat. This is proven by their evidence, and they read the 1R that they said in their last speech, which says, quote, mini-lateralism is crucial to international cooperation, which proves that both these things are synergistic, work hand in hand, and actually their uniqueness claims about minilateralism coming now are actually in fact uniqueness for the affirmative. Your ballot should not be combing through all of the cards, finding a warrant, and then explaining why that warrant disproves this claim, because the 1AR forefronted this, we cross-examined them on this, and the 2R did not have a single reason why they were able to access this. Two is that this impact is not larger. We control the exact same things that we do, and at worst, we are playing defense. There's no reason why minilateralism is able to solve any different of the existential threats that multilateralism is able to solve. The Syria evidence that we read in the 1AC such specific examples like the Washington Naval Treaty, Bretton Woods, UN, and NATO, which all contributed to a peaceful international system. We're able to do things like solve warming and things that otherwise unilateralism would have contributed to an even worse World War II, which proves our point for how multilateral and international cooperation can solve even if smaller cooperations are more rapid or more fast. There's not really an impact to cooperating quickly. Three, their card does not say extinction, which I already explained above. Four, you should evaluate each of these scenarios probabilistically instead of just on shoddy impact turns like we turn this specific impact the probable risk of our Latin American impact, always the probable risk of their impact. Now, the time frame stuff, they do not have a faster time frame. In fact, they've read evidence from 2012 that we were transitioning towards multilateral institutions. We have read evidence from 2018 and 2019 that Latin American instability is coming now, but also the multilateralism is coming now. Five, we make states more willing to cooperate and we are more sustainable. We do not have any cards that say that states would not be willing to cooperate under a multilateral framework, just that they would be more willing to cooperate under a mini-lateral framework. There's no impact to more willing to cooperation other than just a linear risk of all this extinction stuff. They haven't explained how they create more sustainability. Now, I'm going to explain how why multilateralism has not failed. This is just a blip in the 2R. They do not have great defense that says that multilateralism does not work, in the Syria evidence as well as the Brooks evidence should be extended here. One, the Syria evidence was already explained above. It says that absent a multilateral system of conflict, it cites to things going all the way back to the Treaty of Versailles, but all the way to the World War II and the Helsinki Final Act. It says that absent a multilateral system of engagement, all those wars would have cascaded and caused even more conflict. Second is the Brooks evidence. It makes a broad statistical claim about the way that international law broadly shapes credibility. Finally, they do not have uniqueness for this turn. They have not explained what countries are shifting towards minilateralism now or why that's mutually exclusive with multilateralism. Look, we don't have like a massive amount of game on this turn, but all of their advantages to minilateralism are linear advantages over multilateralism, which means that at worst, we just have like a massive amount of defense in the scenario. It's not mutually exclusive, which means that we could potentially do both and countries could be signatories to both treaties. which means that just like an incredibly small risk of this turn is outweighed by a massive risk of Latin American instability that is probable coming now and that will kill everyone because only we are reading cards about extinction.
Good debate.
Debate. The neg doc is 10.
Looks like we're all in. Looks like we're still missing a couple folks.
I think we're just missing Debneil.
Oh yeah.
He's here.
All right. Cool, there we go. I'm happy to announce, unless y'all, if y'all trust me to. Cool. And all right. Congratulations to everybody. This was, I am confident speaking for everybody, a truly awesome debate. The decision is a 2-1 for the affirmative. I'm absolutely not shocked that I did. I thought that I was going to vote F until I got into the flow, realized both sides required some intervention as per based on some of the stuff that was going on, and thought that an F ballot was marginally more interventionist / required a little bit more application of the arguments than the negative, than a negative ballot. I ended up voting neg because I think minilateralism alone is somewhat likely in the status quo. The F encourages more macro scale multilateral engagement, which linearly hampers the effectiveness of minilateralism on its own, which outweighs and controls / turns what ends up being a very, very small risk of the Latin America scenario. I think Latin American scenario is quite low risk for a couple of reasons. One, I'm quite skeptical of escalation. The Russia-China draw-in warrant, I think, is in the 2AC and 2AR, but I'm certain it was not in the 1AR. I actually had the thought on the case debate in the 1AR that the 1AR did not say Russia or China or really have an escalation warrant, just said that cartels are destabilizing because of interconnectedness and cash flows. Maybe I missed something flowing it, but I'm pretty confident there wasn't a broader escalation warrant. It doesn't mean I discount the impact altogether, but I have a higher standard for answering the impact defense, which I think the 2AR is just a little bit too light on. The answer to the Sanchez card, which the card is not anything to write home about, the answer is just that 2NR doesn't explain the warrants and that the things that are undercutting stability are cartels and a lack of American engagement. However, one, I think that escalation is unlikely. I think any instability stays limited. There's no budget for countries to start a war in the first place as the 2NR warrant. So I have tremendous trouble explaining what the draw-in scenario is. Maybe it's not zero risk, but it's extremely low. And I'm not sure that it's linear is enough, because to some degree, I think that there is something of a functional cap on how much escalation there is, or at least maybe not a cap, but at least I'm skeptical that the linearity of it gets to the point of a broader conflict. Then that's not like necessarily all a total takeout itself, but the thing that clinches it for me is the second warrant in the 2AR, which is the lack of American engagement causes instability. I think the 2AR straight up drops that multilateralism inhibits American engagement, cooperation broadly slows it down, which means countries are going to play spoiler to it on the international stage. 2NR doesn't explicitly apply this to cartels, which gives me a lot of pause, but I do think that the American engagement warrant isn't explicit until the 2AR. And that's really all I can, say for, why there would be escalation in the first place. So given the drop of that argument and lack of explanation of how no trade-off means that we can still reduce international prohibition initiatives as effectively as we could in a world of minilateralism alone, which I think is coming, I think they at least access a turn to this impact. So it all depends on the uniqueness debate. My problem is I think the 2AR is a little bit too much posturing. I agree uniqueness is certainly sketchy. I'm not entirely sure what countries are shifting to minilateralism. I agree their evidence is old, but there's not really a substantive answer to the claim that countries are quite interested in it, minilateralism now, to some degree or another at the expense of multilateral forums. I don't think there's a total trade-off and that multilateralism is not going to exist. I think it is more of a linear internal link. So I don't think there's necessarily a trade-off. I don't think the 2AR exploits it in quite the right way that I think you needed to, insofar as you're just we can engage in both forums, not really pushing back on why multilateralism fails, makes cooperation on all these nebulous impacts harder. So I think minilateralism that is arguably coming in the status quo is sufficient for collaboration on these threats, or at least more sufficient than the boost in broader multilateral cooperation that the AF gives it. I don't think it outweighs on time frame or whatever, but it controls the internal link to Latin America. linearly controls the ability to respond to future threats, even if there's no like inherent trade-off. If minilateralism is coming now, I think that's sufficient. I think if the 2AR had a little bit more of the extra step of like no trade-off means that people won't disengage from multilateral frameworks, more of that push, I think probably would have been sufficient to swing my ballot. Now, all this still depends on the neg winning that minilateralism is better, multilateralism is worse. I think they are, at least, you know, to the degree that there is some linear differential. The AF warrant is mostly just like empirics, wars in the past would have cascaded, et cetera. It's empirically checked stability. The neg is like, sure, but it hasn't worked since 1994. And it's been failing since then. And it'll inhibit our responses to future issues. So I'm not sure why the empirical warrants for why multilateralism has been successful matter when the neg is doing a bit of a better job framing it around future issues. That's most of what I've got written down. There's probably some technical stuff that I didn't address, but I will open it up to the others.
Yeah, I can go next. I'm also not surprised at all that this is a 2-1. And I think the main reason is that the 2NR is just like a way better speech than the 2AR. But I think the 2AR is ahead on some technical issues that are hard to overlook. First off, I mean, I agree with DML. I mean, this LA scenario is like about as close to zero as you can get. It's been unstable forever, never gets large scale. The one in Kiev is like more recent. It's really good on this. And it explicitly says that intrastate instability is never going to draw in interstate actors or cause a war. And I don't think there was ever a clear explanation from the affirmative for why Russia and China are going to fight a nuclear war with the US because Latin America is unstable. I end up voting AF on that. I think that the combo of minilateralism and multilateralism is better than minilateralism alone. There's three main arguments that convince me this is the case. First is no trade-off. I ultimately agree with the 2AR's characterization that the 2NR is dangerously light on this. I think the 1AR, it was like a big push. It was like a third of the time they spent on this. And there were like multiple subpoints and warrants, as well as a justification for why they get the argument. I would have been sympathetic to a 2NR arc that's like they don't get this new 1AR arc, but the 1AR had justified why they get the new 1AR arc, and the 2NR just said no new 2AR extrapolation, but didn't say a reason they don't get the arc. And then there was like very little answer to the no trade-off. I think that the next first piece of evidence is pretty good, but I'm also sympathetic to the 2AR that's like don't dig through their evidence to construct a narrative that wasn't in the 2NR. It's also supplemented by the references to your other piece of evidence about minilateralism or being necessary to make multilateralism effective, and the synergistic cooperation between the two being important. There are empirics of the US mutually participating in both of those, as well as just the nature of the neg's argument, which is that minilateralism is effective because it bypasses the gridlock by taking coalitions of the willing, taking states who want to address these problems and are inclined to work together. And it's unclear why there would be reverse causal incentives for these states to reverse course and stop cooperating in small groups over things that they want to do inevitably, which is the only reason it overcomes the deadlock. Second is that minilat may be more effective in general than multilateralism. It may be more likely to solve, but there's likely some large global transnational problems that are going to be very difficult to solve without multilateral problem and getting big opposing states like Russia and China on board. It might be slower, it might be more difficult, it might be less likely to solve, but it's very unlikely that minilateralism is going to be able to solve some of these nebulous global problems that are floating around. And I think both sides would have been helped by specificity as to which scenarios are most important, because both sides kind of just say like global stability and like maybe like warming and maybe like some floating tech thing. It's very unclear. Given that there's very little differentiation on each side, it's like it feels a little interventionist to go in on the app and say there's some problems that can't be solved by minilat, but the warrant like is there, and the neg isn't peeling out specific scenarios either. And given that I think that the argument is logical, it seems reasonable for me to infer that there are likely some subset of these global problems that require transnational cooperation to be able to solve. So even though multilat might take more time, it might be less likely to succeed, it's a necessary component of solving a certain subset of those problems that are the most intractable and difficult. And this substantiates their synergy arguments about why it's helpful to have, you know, small groups focused on the small and easily solvable problems, and then big groups working on the like long timescale hard problems. I think the app is also correct about the time frame stuff, that although there's a good time frame emphasis on solvency, there's not really a time frame emphasis on the impacts. And these impacts seem like long scale, far off things. So even if you solve faster, it's not a big deal given that longer time frames to solve can still be sufficient to resolve the impacts. The third impact is that even the third one, and this ends up being somewhat muted in my decision because the 2AR was light on this, but I think it could have been a bigger part if the 2AR emphasis emphasize it more, which is that even if multilateralism, is ineffective now, the AF makes it effective. We break the multilateral deadlock and bolster credibility. If that's not true, then it's very unclear what the neg link is to this argument, because the only plausible card that substantiates a trade-off is the 1NC card. All the 2NC cards are just comparative about why mini-lat is better, not really a trade-off. And the 1NC card just says that people are turning to mini-lateralism, because multilateralism is ineffective and deadlocked. So if they can't resolve the reasons that it's deadlocked, it's really unclear why people would shift away to mini-lateralism. And conversely, there's also a solid risk that the app can resolve the reasons why multilateralism is failing in the status quo. I don't end up evaluating too much on the no link portion, just like the app can solve, because the 2AR doesn't get to the implication being that if you win, it's inevitably ineffective, then there's no link. So that part isn't a part of my decision, more so just like a part that I think the app could emphasize more on. I also think that there's a reasonable chance that multilateralism can just generally be effective. There's some decent examples in the 2AR. The 2NR says lots of analytical things, like it's slow, it's deadlocked, and there's been no success since 1994. But the app also lists some recent counterexamples, as well as institutions that have been reasonably effective for promoting the liberal international order as well as interstate peace. And that even if these treaties, individual treaties, come very few and far between, that these things can be long-lasting and helpful for mitigating global problems. I think there's lots of complete kill shot args that the app could have made that they never really made, which is that one, our internal links apply equally to minilateralism as to multilateralism. Your whole point is that the US is not credible because we're violating our promises, and that means that other states will violate their promises. It's unclear why that's just for agreements with large numbers of states, not just small states, and why it wouldn't also collapse the credibility of minilateralism. Second is that just like a no link arg, I mean, it seems to me like the app is minilateralism. It's based on the explanation in CrossX, you were Russia and China will probably not get on board. There's not enough global actors, but we create coalitions of the willing that'll get and then all the other countries you list. And that seems to be exactly the differential the neg is describing between minilateralism and multilateralism. And then third is, I think a greater emphasis on specificity would have helped you a lot. So if you explain what the most important impacts are for minilateralism or multilateralism to solve, whether it's global warming, whether it's the emerging tech stuff, whether it's interstate peace, and why regional coalitions or small number of states or coalitions of the willing are going to be insufficient to solve those problems. And then more emphasis on the, even if minilateralism is more likely to be effective on any given issue, it can't take on the big enough issues necessary to secure global peace. So long story short, I think given the 2AR, I agree that I'm probably extrapolating more on the second and third arc, which is why those were more muted points of my decision. I think the app is winning a large risk that there is not a trade-off, and that the synergy between the two is better than one alone, is the brunt of my decision.
I agree almost entirely with what Jeremy said, so I'm not going to rehash a lot of the wheel. I think there are a couple of points of difference that I'll highlight. I'll say that as far as this Latin American scenario, I agree there's not much of a risk. My framing of this ends up being a little bit different and more in line with the 2AR, in that I think there is some risk, but also I think all the things that Jeremy said, low trade-offs, sort of multi-lat functions as terminal defense, to the idea that there's a difference between mini-lat and multi-lat, I think all those things put together means that, okay, there's some insulation of this external impact, and I think there's significant mitigation of any idea that these sort of longer time frame impacts or implications of minilateralism versus multilateralism outweigh whatever that is. So I don't think this is hugely different from the thing that Jeremy said, just a slightly different strategic framing that I think is more in line with the very top of the 2AR. But other than that, I don't really think I have too much to add. The only two other things I'll say. One, I think for me, this also ends up being, who do I have to read more from the cards for, and who has said the things that I need them to say. I think that I agree that the 2NR was better than the 2AR in lots of sort of broad strategic vision, general sort of explanations and stuff, and fleshing out some pieces of the cards. But Mohol, I think there are just some sort of top level things that I think Jeremy's pointed out, that if these are better strategic pushes in the 2NR, then I don't feel like I have to connect the dots more for you and pulling warrants to be able to back up things I think the 2AR is just ahead on as a strategic focus. I also agree with this point of I think that the app should have made a stronger pivot in the 1AR of look, you need to explain to us what coalitions of countries change. Literally think about the way we explain this app in CrossX. There are specific groups of countries that will model the app, that there are specific coalitions against China and Russia that happen, right? This seems in line with mini-lats, we're trying to make the Kyoto Protocol or some massive drug regime happen necessarily. And I think that that's another thing that would help you. in terms of just the sort of permutation style argument you end up going for in the 2AR. Another note I have is that I think the sort of implication of uniqueness was a little sketchy to me. Like, I think there's a lot of pushes in the 2NR that are just like, we are ahead on the uniqueness level question, right? I don't really know why that is like an auto vote neg in the context of this trade-off argument that the affirmative seems like they're inevitably going to go for. And I think some sort of explanation of that would be clear. Like, what does it mean for multilateralism to inevitably fail? And why does that, like, well, why does that mean this trade-off argument or this no trade-off argument they're articulating doesn't work? Those are the sort of other miscellaneous notes I'll have. The one last thing I'll say, Mitty, really fantastic careers. It has been a pleasure judging you both over the last couple of seasons, from when you were sophomores and doubles of Stanford 2 years ago to the times I judged you last year, this year. Only wish I got to do it more. I know it's been a really difficult year for your program, and you all did a fantastic job this tournament and all season. And yeah, just huge amount of respect for you all as debaters, and it's really been a pleasure to judge you all. And yeah, happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for the kind words. I had a question for Jeremy and Debnil. Do you think that, like, I think it would be hard for us to find like specific link evidence that treaties based on decrim of marijuana would be exclusively multilateral. So then, okay, yeah.
Oh, sorry, you can finish the question, but
I was going to ask, in that case, is the impact turn not the right 2NR strategy?
So
we were also considering T.
My problem wasn't like a lack of ev, it was more so a lack of explanation in the 2AR, because the AF never made these like were mini-lateralism, not multilateralism args, so it wasn't a problem at all in this debate. So if either of these two were in the 2NR, I probably end up voting neg, which is one, like the 2AC did not say no trade-off. We extended this because of that. It's like we did not make new args. We only read new cards answering the 2AC args, like hold the line. That was there. I probably agree. I probably vote neg. Second is if the neg clearly explains the trade-off argument. And it's like, look, the internal link that we're conceding is that the AF breaks the deadlock in the instance of marijuana, which infuses the US with new credibility and infuses multilateralism with new credibility, which causes people to turn to these initiatives more. And that trades off with mini-lateralism, which our uniqueness evidence from the 1NC is clear that people are only turning to now because of their grievances with multilateralism and why it's viewed as ineffective. The AF cannot change the structural reasons why it's ineffective, but causes states to foolhardily turn towards it. And if either of those are in the 2NR, then I'd probably vote next year.
Okay, so if that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Debnil.
Oh, I was going to say I agree with that. The other thing I think you can do a little bit more of in the 2NC is just reading lines from the pieces of terminal impact evidence that you know that the AF is going to inevitably go for, and explain how these might point out a trade-off for you. I think that just cementing that trade-off in some degree might help you get out of this idea that like marijuana is specifically insulated if that ends up being a rebuttal to it. That being said, I agree with Jeremy, it wasn't. These are more just like notes I think we each of us had on the debate as we were resolving it, make it easier.
Okay, and given that, do you think that the impact turn was the correct 2NR?
Yeah, so I think you would have been in a pretty rough spot on both ESR and Chadha. I think that T was viable, but I would be a little bit AF leaning there, but it's up to you. And then I think that this position, I mean, you were in a good spot going into the 2NR. It's just there needed to be a clearer answers to the no trade-off arg.
I agree with that too.
I had a quick question about T. Like I was like, if it was just T, I was thinking like just the extra T, like they can't make a treaty, like we'll concede, like, you know, even if they win their indict of Bernard. Like I didn't read a TVA in the 2NC, but like kind of like our interp, like we can lose this, but they still can't make a treaty. Like they can change criminal law or whatever. Like they can win that in the 2AR, but like no game on this extra T violation. Do you think that's viable or like not really?
It was never clear what have excluded making treaties.
Yeah, I did not have a piece of that. I was just like, it's like,
yeah,
wait.
I mean, it didn't seem like extra T, just like a mechanism to enact, like treaties can enact stuff.
Okay, that makes sense.
I thought the 1AR was fine on that.
I don't have any other questions. The no trade-off thing, like that was the strategic error on the, or that was an error on the 2NR. So that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
What piece of Latin America defense did you find most compelling, and how do you think we can better approach responding to those in future debates?
Yeah, so I can pull up the neg card doc real quick. It was their 1NC card, And I mainly like the lines at the bottom. It's like interstate warfare is very unlikely given the region's current peaceful status, limited defense budget. It's understandable that regional governments have other priorities. It seemed like your evidence from looking only really said the instability internally from 2016, as well as this evidence says also in other parts, security threats in the region are generally insurgent in nature and seems to make the trade-off unlikely between intrastate and interstate warfare. I think that leveraging more what the actual impact in your 1ACLS card is, which is like when there's tons of insecurity and instability on the border region of the US, it harms our ability to engage in foreign engagement and forces us to retrench. And then that's what causes Russia war and China war. And then I think that that explanation becomes more like having more of a clear impact. Because I mean, there was just never a clear explanation at any point in the debate for why instability in the region means Russia or China is going to like invade Latin America and draw the US or whatever.
Also seems like we need better author poll debates here. But that makes sense. Right.
Sorry, I also don't think your impact card says extinction.
It is tagged pretty hyperbolic.
Because like the top of the 2AR is just like extinction, and this is the way to do it. I was like, okay, is that right? Like, is there a short time frame for extinction that correctly cross applies the 200 impact calculus? And I was just like, I don't even see where this card gets you to extinction. So that's kind of why.
I know China or Russia allow the US to engage with them in a conflict. It's
like,
there's like a little bit there, you know.
But I guess more accurately, given the sort of like arguments you're making this about like very short term escalation, right? Not sure about that one.
That makes sense. We're gonna go prepare for our next debate, but thank you all for the decisions.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Good, great debate, great tournament, and great season, Mitty. Good luck, Bellarmine.
Thank you.